this year, but it opened up the opportunity for us to bring in some special guests from all over the country to join us, and also to you to view from wherever you are via Facebook Live or YouTube. So thank you so much for watching. If you have questions or comments for any of our panelists in any of the sessions, be sure to let us know. Just type them in, and we'll be sure to ask them as we go around the call today. Also want to remind you that you can pick up any of Homer Hickham's books at homerhickam.com/bookshop. And if you're an aspiring writer, be sure to get details on the Virtual Rocket Boys Festival essay contest, where you can pick up autographed copies of books from many of the authors that are joining us today. So my pal Homer Hickam is something of a Renaissance man. He has many interests. As a high schooler, he won the National Science Fair, and that led to a career in Virginia Tech in engineering. He was a Vietnam vet. He spent many years with NASA. After that, has written 19 books now over 20 years. And in his spare time, he digs up dinosaurs. So today's session is from Rocket Boy to Dinosaur Hunter. And Homer, what do you do for fun? I mean, do you just watch movies and eat popcorn? My goodness, you do so many things.
Well, let me mildly correct you there, Burke. I don't dig up dinosaurs. That's why God made grad students.
No, I guess the real first question on this is how you get from one to the other. How did Rocket Boys become an interest in paleontology?
It turned out that the director of October Sky, that movie that was based on Rocket Boys, the director Joe Johnston also directed a little movie called Jurassic Park 3. And I was visiting Joe at his palatial estate in California one day while he was doing his research for Jurassic Park 3, and he brought out this little cigar box, and in it was what looked like to me just grayish, yellowish gravel. And he said, "Well, those are pieces of real dinosaurs, Homer." And I went, "Wow, where did you get those?" And he said, "Well, I'm working with this fellow called Dr. Jack Horner out at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana, and some other folks there. And I've been out in Montana, and they're showing me around, and we're looking for locations." And I said, "Wow, the next time you go out, can I go with you?" And Joe said, "No, you can't. Dr. Horner is very selective on who he lets go out with him, and so no, you can't." So I did anyway, and went out to the camp and there in northeastern Montana, and met Dr. Horner and the other folks out there working, and just fell in love with it. One thing about being a West Virginia boy, I can kind of tell the difference between a rock and a bone. And so it's just something that I've done for the last 20 years, almost every summer, go out and prospect for dinosaur bones. And of course, everything goes to either the Museum of the Rockies and now to the University of Washington also. So we don't just pick up things willy-nilly and put them in our pockets and bring them back. What we do is these are for very serious scientific studies, and so they need to go to the museums or universities that with professional paleontologists.
And speaking of which, we've got some professional paleontologists joining us on the call. Homer, introduce Pat and John for us.
Well, John Scannella is a dear friend, who's the curator at the Museum of the Rockies. That's in Bozeman, Montana. And Pat is, I think, John's boss, sort of, there. And Pat is, they're both not only brilliant paleontologists, but they also do wonderful field work. Pat, if you, Burke, you're not very far from the Smithsonian, are you not?
That's correct,
Very
right
close.
down the road.
All right, so if you go down there and look at that big T-Rex that they have there, that's one that Pat dug up, the Wankel T-Rex. So that's a Montana T-Rex. And years ago, Pat and Dr. Horner and a team from the Museum of the Rockies went out very close to where we are doing some of our dinosaur hunting these days, and dug up the Wankel Rex, T-Rex, named after the family that found it. And it was almost complete, an amazing specimen. So it's just a delight and a great honor to work with professionals like John and Pat.
Fellas, thanks for joining us from Bozeman, Montana today. And Pat, I want to start with you. Is this something as a little kid that you were fascinated with? Because as children, we all, or many of us, little boys grow up, dreaming of dinosaurs and watching them in the movies and playing with them. Is this something that you came to as a child or as an older guy?
Kind of both, Bert. I was pretty lucky to grow up in a small university town called Princeton, and they had a great museum there in Geo Hall. And as a little kid, I used to, ride my bicycle up there to the museum, and it was really cool. There was a Allosaurus skeleton on exhibit there that I used to just gaze at all the time. Growing up and looking at that, I was thinking, wow, to be a paleontologist, you have to be a real special type of person. I actually got more into music and other things over the years, but I was reintroduced to paleontology when I met Jack Horner, and he was actually working at the museum, and I met him about a year before he found the baby dinosaurs, which was back in 1978, which was just spectacular. And from that moment on, it was just like, throwing a lure out and hooking a big fish called Pat Leegee and reeling him in. And Jack allowed me to help him in the lab. I'd be there every night. And we would just work together. And he and Don Baird, the curator at Princeton at the time, got a big grant, and they asked me to work for them. And I've been in paleontology over 40 years. So I'm a lucky man.
When Homer and I visited the Museum of the Rockies several weeks ago, you were kind enough to give us a behind the scenes tour of how you do what you do. And your associate, John, walked us through, and I leaned over to Homer about 10 minutes in, and I said, there's a guy that loves what he does for a living. John, you were sort of bouncing in your shoes to show us all these new things. You really seem to be that guy who has cracked the code on doing something you love.
Oh yeah, I've wanted to work with dinosaurs since I was about 3, I guess. I used to read all the dinosaur books in the library when I was a little kid, and my parents would take me to I grew up in New York, so they'd take me to the American Museum in New York. My mom said I ran up to the dinosaur skeletons and tried to hug them. And then a little bit after that, I would actually watch on TV documentaries about dinosaurs. And when the Wankel T-Rex was being excavated by the Museum of the Rockies, I would see that. And being in New York, be like, wow, Montana, that seems like a cool place. And there's dinosaurs out there. Maybe we need to go there at some point. And so, fast forward, and here I am as the curator of paleontology at the museum. Couldn't ask for anything more. It's just surrounded by dinosaurs all day, and I get to work with cool people like Pat and Homer, and it's awesome.
It really cracks me up because John was a really young kid when we were digging up the Wankel T-Rex.
Yeah.
And he was actually watching us do all this. And now I get to work with John. And that's really cool. I mean, it's like John's dream has come true, but it's my dream come true too, because we are now in the next generation of science and research here at the Museum of the Rockies.
Our panel is called From Rocket Boy to Dinosaur Hunter, and Homer has written clearly the book Rocket Boys, also wrote a book called Dinosaur Hunter, but we're fortunate to have joining us from Seattle, Washington, Dr. Stephen Wood. He's a senior scientist there who's done lots of work with the Mars Polar Lander, the Phoenix Mars Lander, and does lots of research on polar ice and frost and ground ice on Mars and Mercury and the moon. Homer is all about going back to the moon, less so on Mars. Steve, where do you fall on, do we go to the moon or do we go to Mars? We'll see, we might get a little debate happening here virtually. Nope, Steve, we can't hear you.
I just said I'm going to go all in and say both. We have to do both.
I like it.
Win-win, yes.
Hey, as a young man, what interested you? Did you grow up fascinated by that great world beyond? And is this the manifestation of childhood dreams? You know, we talked to some folks yesterday who were in the movie October Sky, and one of the gentlemen said, you know, when he's on a movie set, he always remembers to take a moment and look around and think, you know, this is the culmination of something I've always wanted to do. Did you always want to be in science?
I think I think I did, but I didn't really know it. I think I have always been fascinated with space, and read a lot of science fiction as a kid. So it was sort of interest in other worlds, and I never really thought of myself as an astronomer, or getting interested in that until college. I took an astronomy course where they talked only about planets and what we can observe about the planets in our own solar system, and that's what really got me interested in a career in space. And just the idea, these paleontologists are exploring another world and, from another time, on this planet. And, I think there's a parallel with me exploring other worlds, outside of ours in the present time. So it's all exploration, and it's all just a lot of fun.
Homer, you talked about the very real common thread of director Joe Johnston, who directed October Sky, also directed Jurassic Park 3, and that being what first tipped you off on paleontology, and that you sort of pestered him that you wanted to go out there. But as a kid, were you fascinated equally by, you very famously Sputnik and the space race, but were you as a kid into dinosaurs as well?
Well, not so much dinosaurs, but certainly fossils. Growing up in a coal camp, we had access to trillions of tons of coal that had fossils in them. And so I used to go up and sit in the old, we call them slack dumps, and peel back these layers of time and find these ferns and plants and that were from that era, the Carboniferous era. That was actually, I didn't know that at the time. It was way before there were any dinosaurs. But I wondered about it and wondered if I kept digging through this coal, if I would ever come across a dinosaur bone. I was kind of curious about it even then. But I think, Stephen, talking about looking at the moon and Mars and the other planets, in many, many ways, what John and Pat do is looking at a different planet. This planet that we're on right now is totally different from the planet back during the Jurassic and the Cretaceous eras and Triassic. Totally different planet. So by studying that planet that existed then but not now, that will definitely translate to looking at the other planets in the solar system and beyond. It's not going to be too surprising to me that if we find at least some evidence of fossils from whether it's bacteria or larger animals on Mars, because certainly Mars had a time during its life that perhaps life did rise there. And so using the same techniques that John and Pat use, ultimately we'll be looking at Mars. And that's why Mars is interesting to me. With the moon, I just want to go up there and mine the blame thing. Okay, I just want to go up there and put coal wood on the moon. That's my idea. But Mars is interesting. The moon is industrial, and we're going to make money on the moon. But Mars is interesting scientifically, and I think that we may find fossil life up there. And we'll use the same techniques that John and Pat have pioneered to look at for instance, I know John is looking at the interior now of these dinosaur bones, which are actually they're not fossils in that they're the impressions left from an animal, but actually the real bones. They've been mineralized, but those are the real bones. So he's going inside those bones and looking to see growth patterns and the cellular structure and everything else that ultimately will translate if we find life somewhere else other than Earth.
You have been very vocal, Homer. I'm going to not let you off the hook on this in your social media that we not skip past the moon and try to go to Mars, and you say, that's essentially, I don't want to misquote you here, a fool's errand. So why are you so insistent on the moon?
Well, the moon is accessible. We're talking about human space flight, not robotic. So both really need to be studied intensively robotically. I just think the time and treasure it'll take to put humans on Mars as versus the moon is exponential. And we can get to the moon. We can set up a base there. I think there are resources on the moon that we can use, and that will help the economy of the Earth. Where Mars, again, is kind of like a scientific laboratory. It won't give back much in the terms of the economy to the world, but it certainly will be interesting scientifically. And I think robotically we can do that right now without worrying about sending humans to the Mars. We're gonna have to develop some big bad rockets to do that, nuclear rockets probably. Right now the moon is very accessible, and that's why I'd prefer to go back there. Or Montana. I'll take Montana too.
Which in some ways is a whole nother planet all itself. Dr. Wood, what say you? Do you agree or disagree with Homer's assumption?
Well, I definitely agree. I think the moon is an obvious next, place for humans in both, not just industrially, but also scientifically, because there is, as we know, ice trapped in the polar regions of the moon in places that never see the sun, these permanently shadowed regions. And that ice could be billions of years old. And it might contain chemicals and other things from early in the solar system that will be of great interest scientifically, as well as, give you water to drink and air to breathe and all the things that humans need when they're on the moon. So it's a really tremendous resource. And there was just a couple of news stories yesterday about new discoveries about more water on the moon than we thought there was before. So it's really an exciting time, and I think has bolstered the case for going to the moon scientifically as well as commercially.
There are people watching from all over the country, all over the world on Facebook Live and YouTube, and I'm just like those folks. I look at you gentlemen with some measure of fascination, because it looks like you do these incredibly interesting, fulfilling, fun jobs. But I think I speak for a lot of people. I'd like to know on a daily basis what you do. So Pat, you roll into the office in the morning, and what is your day like at Museum of the Rockies?
Well, John's having more fun than me because he gets to play with science all day long. But I'm the department head, and I oversee the operations not only of the paleontology department, but also the exhibits department here at the museum. And that's what happens when you are at a place too long. Like I've been here 35 years. So they just give you more to do. But what's really fascinating for me is to watch John and the staff and everyone prepare these specimens. Now, what's really cool, you brought up the word exploration, and another one would be discovery. And the cool thing, and I think what hooked Homer when he started coming out in the field was, when you find a fossil, you start digging up a fossil, you're the first person that's ever seen that fossil. And then when you watch everything kind of develop here in the labs, whether we're looking at the exterior morphology or looking at the inside of a bone, we're learning so much about the growth and behavior of these animals. And, like I mentioned earlier, I'm in a lot of meetings all the time, but you can bet I'm down in the paleo lab a few times a day to see the progress. And it's really a lot of fun.
John, what about you? What is a typical day for you like at Museum of the Rockies?
I mean, it can vary, but most days I find myself surrounded in the collections by the fossils of dinosaurs and other ancient creatures. So I might be taking measurements or describing the features of bones, or working with students who are studying the fossils, or in the lab overseeing the fossils coming out of the rocks, or as Homer mentioned, we cut slices out of the bones so we can study them under a microscope. So it really varies from day to day. And in the summers, typically I'm in a tent somewhere in eastern Montana, going out and looking for more fossils so we can learn more things about the deep past.
Up on the screen now, there's a picture of you and Homer standing beside one another, and it looks like you're holding big clumps of stuff. But it's a little more than that. What are the big clumps of stuff that you and Homer are holding there?
I have, so right here, like Homer is holding this, which is part of the foot of a Tyrannosaurus Rex that Homer found. And so the specimen was nicknamed H-Rex for Homer. And then I am holding this, which is a nasal horn from the horned dinosaur Triceratops, a site that Homer found. It's called Homer's nose. And so this is the nose horn of a pretty big Triceratops. And it's really cool because not only is it a really big nose horn of a Triceratops, but it's unfused to the rest of the skull around it, which means that this animal would have gotten even bigger if it hadn't died when it did. So to my knowledge, I think this might be one of, if not the largest Triceratops horn that's still unfused to the rest of the skull. So Homer's discovered a lot of cool things in the Hell Creek Formation of Montana.
I can see the Triceratops horn when you hold it, but some of these other pieces, like the one, the stuff you see down in the lower right there on the screen, when you're out there and you're digging, or as Homer says, you have grad students digging, and you come across something that to the untrained eye looks like a wood chip. How do you know what that is and that it's significant? And it's not just a piece of rock or a piece of clay. How do you learn that?
Well, I mean, part of it is just lots of time spent with fossils and looking closely in the cross section. You can see kind of pores and openings in a piece of bone that you wouldn't find in a rock, for example. But it can take some time to be able to identify fossils in the field, especially if you like even if I go to a different area where I haven't worked before, it takes a while to get the search image of what the fossils might look like in that certain zone. So it can be a little bit tricky. So being able to find cool fossils is certainly an acquired skill that Homer has developed.
And as being out in the field, John, is that your favorite part of the job? If there was one thing you said, I love to do this, would that be it?
Well, I mean, going out in the field and finding new things is awesome because it's like exploring a new world. You're finding new things. You're the first person to see these things. So that is really cool. But also I like being back in the collections where we're just surrounded by the bones that are all prepared, and you can really see the details that are concealed by the rock when you're in the field. So you can kind of get up close and personal and really get to know the fossils one-on-one in collections. So it's those two things.
Fair enough. This is our From Rocket Boys to Dinosaur Hunter panel with the Museum of the Rockies gang, and also Homer Hickam and Dr. Stephen Wood. And Stephen, I want to ask you the same question I asked the other gentleman. What does a typical day look like for you? What do you do on a daily basis when you roll out of bed?
Well, I go to my office and get on my computer, kind of like a lot of people. But what I look at on my computer is a lot of data that we've received from spacecraft. We've got well, we did have 2 active rovers. We've got 2 spacecraft on Mars on the surface now. There's another one on the way. And then there's, I think, 6 orbiters. So we're just receiving, fire hose of information that is kind of more than we can handle. So there's a lot to study and a lot to figure out. And all this data is publicly available. Taxpayers paid for it. And so it's available to anyone who wants to look at it. And a lot of the missions do a really good job of getting like images out that, as soon as they come in. So there's a lot for everyone at home to explore if they're interested. And then I also like to do lab work. I can't, don't want to spend all day on the computer. I love getting, using my hands. And one of the things I've done is build a Mars simulation chamber. So we can do experiments and try to form ice. CO2 ice, actually, like it forms on Mars, is one of my research projects right now.
How cool does that sound? This is what I'm going to do today. For most of us, for all of you, it sounds like you have wonderful, wonderful careers. And we've got some questions that are starting to come in, so I want to try to bang those out. This one comes from Laura. She says, I love biology and medicine, but at the same time, my passion is astronomy. Since I was a kid, I always dreamed about working at NASA. Is it possible that I don't abandon my dream of working at NASA and keep working with medicine? I'm 17. I'm currently living in Florida. Homer, I'm going to throw that one to you because you had these 2 very distinct careers as, working at NASA and then as an author. So would you advise Laura, who's 17, to stick with biology and medicine, but also explore, or should she explore her passion in astronomy and her dream of working at NASA? What do you do when you're good at a couple of things?
Well, I think you ought to stick with whatever your passion is and whatever is the most fun for you when you go to work every day. And it's certainly possible to combine all those things. I mean, we have a lot of medical doctors that work for NASA, needless to say. Some of them are astronauts, astronomers, certainly. We have quite a few of those who work for NASA, but not only NASA, but also folks like Stephen who are working out at the universities, and the NASA contractors and so on. They have vibrant careers in the space business. Space is a lot more of a NASA. I love my old employer. It's a great federal agency, but in fact, what we're seeing is almost an explosion of the space sciences these days around the world, and at the university level, as well as the private industry like SpaceX and Blue Origin. There's not one singular path to work in the space business, I'd say.
I think that's a great point. She's 17, she's living in Florida. There are opportunities in medicine within that NASA world. So don't give up on your dream. And Laura, if you look at your screen, you'll see guys that didn't give up on their dream and they pursued it. And now they get to live that dream every day. Here's an interesting comment from a gentleman named Tim.
Is that what's interesting? I was looking at Steve's website there, or a picture with him, and we saw a picture of the geology of Mars there. Well, John and Pat, they know geology backwards and forwards as well, and it's interesting to me, and I bet to them as well, when they look at the geology of Mars and see how that terrain has been formed actually by water, the movement of a liquid, which probably is water, that has caused all that erosion and so on. Looks very much like to me, like the Hell Creek Formation, where we find T-Rex and Triceratops and so on. Not that these animals are going to be in Mars, but nonetheless, we do recognize the geology. And I think, of course, Pat and I are too old probably to go to Mars, but I think
Pat protests.
You got me all excited.
Go out there and find some fossils would be my guess.
We've got a note here that came in from a viewer whose name is Tim. He says, I moved away from Bozeman only a few years after the second building at Museum of the Rockies opened. I remember it was first starting in a different building. Museum of the Rockies is truly a hidden gem. It is a wonderful facility. For those that don't understand how all this works, Pat, what is it about Montana that makes it dinosaur central? What makes Montana so conducive to that?
Well, the great thing about Montana is, it represents a lot of different time periods. And a lot of the work, as John and Homer and everybody has said, is happening on the eastern part of the state in the Hell Creek Formation. But there are many other formations like the Two Medicine, which is an earlier age, Judith River. It is kind of like, a dinosaur haven. There have been paleontologists working in Montana since the 19th century. So it's nothing new to, the field of paleontology. And we have, and John, you know better than I these days, I don't even know how many universities and museums work in Montana anymore during the summer. But it is a very special place to get the information that they need to answer their research questions. John, do you have any idea?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I know there's a lot of different groups working in Montana. And as Pat said, in Montana, you have the right aged rock exposed at the surface to be able to find fossils, especially of dinosaurs, especially if you're looking at Cretaceous dinosaurs like T-Rex and Triceratops. And on top of that, the right age rock can be found at the surface in other places. For example, in parts of New Jersey, there's the right age rock, but in places like New Jersey, they might be covered up by malls and parking lots and things like that. So Montana has the combination of having the right age rock at the surface of the earth with it being exposed. so that you can see the fossils weathering out and they can be more easily accessible than they might be if they were under a building.
Very
Maybe
good.
you have a photo of the Badlands, Burke. I know you went out there. Do you
Oh,
have a
yeah.
photo you can show, or?
Yeah, I'll see if we can have
Yeah.
somebody back at Master Control pull up some Montana photos for us
Cool.
and throw them up there. This is, by the way, our if you're just tuning in and you're scrolling by in your Facebook feed or you found us on YouTube, it's the virtual Rocket Boys Festival. And if you have a question or a comment for any of our panelists today, this is the From Rocket Boys to Dinosaur Hunter panel. Send it on in and we'll be happy to ask it in our remaining moments. I want to ask Dr. Wood. Homer touched on these private companies that are involved in the space race now, Elon Musk company and Virgin Galactic and these folks. Is that a good thing or a bad thing in your estimation as somebody that works in that field?
Oh, I would say it's definitely a good thing. I mean, competition is a major driver of innovation and advances, and I think that having it not just be a one company or one organization is got to be good for everybody, for sure.
Do you see a time, Dr. Wood, when my age group, the astronauts that we grew up with became huge inspirations to kids? They became heroes and household names. Will we ever get back to that, or are we moving in such a way that it will become sort of rote and routine, and we'll never see the superstar astronauts again?
It's hard to imagine not it becoming rote and routine, but I think that especially once we get people back on the surface of the moon and beyond, I think that interest and popularity will definitely increase once we get beyond low Earth orbit.
Homer, if you had to pick one or the other, I'm going to make it a tough question for you. And this actually came in from one of our viewers. If you had to pick one or the other, space or dinosaur hunting?
Well, I can get to Montana. I can't get to space. So, and I had a wonderful career with NASA, but I just absolutely love going out and working with Pat and John and the young people out in the field every summer and meeting them. And so that's a lot of fun, but also still got my foot in the other space world in that I'm on the board of the space camp here in Huntsville, Alabama. And so, I don't know. It's hard to make that choice. Those choices kind of be made for me, as it depends on the time of the year. During the winter, working very closely out there with Space Camp to help it get ready for the summer, and then summer I try to get out to Montana to hunt dinosaurs. So,
you're also a member of the National Space Council, and there's been lots of talk about that in previous sessions, but I'm not sure what that is exactly. What does one do as a member of the National Space Council, and what is the Space Council's mission?
Well, National Space Council was originally formed back in the 1980s, and it kind of went out of business for a while. But when the Vice President Pence got in, he actually I learned later that he had read one of my books, not Rocket Boys, but one called Back to the Moon, and that caused him to be very interested in the space business. And so as soon as he got into office, he reformed the National Space Council, which basically includes cabinet heads. There are a lot of space work done at the federal level besides NASA. The Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, for instance, is very involved in the space business and all the regulations required for that. So National Space Council is actually at the cabinet level, and then he brought folks in like me at the consultant level to advise on what should be the priorities in the federal space program. So of course, I want to go back to the moon. I want to put Colwood on the moon, and so that's certainly one of them, and has caused the program called Artemis now to be created, where we will carry humans back to the moon there to build infrastructure, hopefully for a base from which, sort of like our South Pole Station in Antarctica, from which other countries and commercial entities as well can have a place to stay and then move out into the hinterlands of the moon and start studying it for its resources as well as scientifically.
Do we have a timeline on that?
Yeah, 2024 is when we're supposed to do it. We'll see. Space is hard. But the vice president set a deadline like Kennedy did for landing on the moon in the 1960s. We all need deadlines. And so that right now is the deadline to return humans to the moon. We'll see. There's a lot of work yet to be done. But the nice thing about the deadline, it's caused some vigor to occur in the space program to try to meet that. And if we don't meet it, I think we're going to come close. So it's a good thing.
Questions are coming in from our viewers, and this one I think is good for every one of you. What's the first step to become what you do? So if a young person wants to become a paleontologist, and John, we'll start with you. What do you do? What do you study? How do you get into the dinosaur business?
Well, I think it just starts off with being curious, having lots of questions that you want to see answered, and then if you pursue those questions through school, if you're looking to get into paleontology, you could study things like geology or biology that might help with answering some of the questions you have, and just really becoming as involved as you can in whatever way is possible. Like, for example, I used to spend a lot of time volunteering at museums just to try to get close to what was happening in that way and through the school. And so just following the curiosity to where it leads you, I think can take you very far.
Pat, if you want to get into working in the museum space, get into paleontology, for example, what do you study in college? What's the major? What classes do you take?
Yeah, well, basically, you want to take courses in geology and paleontology, biology, like John said, and all. But and I think John covered this pretty well. But there's another element that I think you have to have is a passion for it.
Yeah.
It really does become your life's work when you have that passion. So as John put it, you start with that curiosity, you go to school, and I'm going to put a plug in here for Montana State University, a great place to do this, folks. Yeah, I mean, you can follow that dream. If you have the passion for it, you'll get there.
Dr. Wood, if you're interested in working in the space industry in whatever capacity that might be, what are the first steps you should take?
Well, like they said, I think depends on what aspect of space you're interested in, but astronomy, majoring in astronomy or physics, I think are really good backgrounds. Of course, math is the basis of most of that, and so that's a really important area. But also, I think it's important to find a mentor and someone that kind of does what you want to do and can teach you and see what it's really like. I think that's a really important thing to look for.
That's great advice, to find a coach and a mentor. Oh, here's a question for you, Homer. How can I build an amateur rocket like the ones you built?
You can't. It's
It
impossible.
sounds like a recipe for disaster.
No, it's I grew up in a different time and a different age. Those rockets were made out of steel and required master machinists in the machine shop there in Colwood to, I could design the nozzle, or we could, but no way I could make it. I needed these wonderful machinists that would work on their own time after hours to build these things. And then the propellant that we use is extremely dangerous. So best thing now is to join a rocket club and order a kit, and you learn all about rocketry, building it with the kit, and it's safe. And fortunately, I've got all my fingers and eyeballs and toes, but there are kids that have experimented with amateur rocketry that don't, and so it's an extremely dangerous enterprise, and one that should be approach, not by reading Rocket Boys and saying, I want to go do what they did, because you really can't. The times have changed. They'll probably put you in jail, actually, if you get the propellant that we use. No, it's best to join the National Association of Rocketry or a local rocket club. And just as Dr. Wood said, you need a mentor in rocketry as well. So get with somebody who knows what they're doing and go from there.
And there's a company that I know, I see lots of the kids that would come to the Rocket Boys Festival. I think it's Estes Rockets.
Estes,
yeah.
Estes, and there's a couple other manufacturers that build these rockets and supply the motors. You know, the motors are the ones that are dangerous. When you try to make those yourself, typically you have to go through a big learning curve, and during that learning curve, that's a dangerous time. And so I'd skip over that and just go ahead with the manufactured rockets, because you learn the techniques, you learn the science behind them by working with those. And that's the whole idea. Is not, I mean, you know, there's no reason for you to reinvent something that's already been invented. You want to take the knowledge base, learn that, and then go on from there into, if you're interested in it, professional rocketry and the space business.
Tim just chimed in and mentioned Estes Rockets as well. Tim, thanks for watching. Here's a question that's come in for Dr. Wood. What can we look forward to learning from the current mission that's on its way to Mars?
The Perseverance rover, I think they're talking about.
Yep.
Well, a lot of things. One of the things that I'm most excited about is that it has a ground penetrating radar instrument on it. And so one of the really difficult things about using robots to explore other planets is it's really hard to get information from below the surface. You know, we don't have people there to dig and drill and things like that. And so this radar instrument is going to be able to look at things that are beneath the ground within meters of the surface and potentially find evidence for ice or other aspects of the subsurface that we are really going to, I think, learn a lot more about Mars from that.
Yeah, if you could get that ground penetrating radar to pass over eastern Montana, Stephen, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, I'll work on it.
Yeah. I think John and Pat would both be very appreciative of that. Pat, I think back at Master Control for the Virtual Rocket Boys Festival, they've got some photos that are coming up of Montana, and you'd asked about that in terms of, oh, here we go, of what makes you know, Montana special for dinosaur hunting. Pat, are you there?
I'm sorry. I forgot to turn off all my other electronics. So
That's all right.
Question?
So you had asked us to dig up some photos of Montana and talk about what makes Montana sort of dinosaur central. And you and John have mentioned that there's untold numbers of groups that come in during the warm weather months, and you know, you're swarmed by them out there. But what is it about Montana that makes it special?
Well, you know, it's right in front of everybody right now. And as John said earlier, I mean, these are what we call badlands. And, you know, they're not vegetated or heavily vegetated at all. So we can actually see bones actually weathering out of these hills that you see in front of you. And that leads us to what we call a bone horizon if we follow it correctly. And then we will make some test digs, things like that, to actually locate where the fossil is coming out. It is a lot easier to do it in this type of an environment than it's going to be, like John said, in a place like New Jersey. I grew up in New Jersey also looking for fossils, and it was very difficult because of the vegetation. So when you have millions and millions of acres that are exposed like this, it's a great place to be exploring. It's a great place for exploration.
If I could add to that too, if you look at some of these pictures, you can see that there's actual layers within the hillsides. Those layers of rocks represent basically layers of time. So if you're out in eastern Montana or a similar environment and you're walking up and down these hills through the different layers, you're in a very real sense time traveling up and down these hills and seeing fossils from slightly different times as you go up and down them. So it's a really cool thing to be able to do in a place like Montana where it's so exposed and open like that.
John, was there a certain find that excited you more than another?
No, no, they're all really exciting. I guess, the first time I found a dinosaur was really cool, but then the next one was also cool. And so they're all awesome.
He's jazzed. I love a guy who's jazzed about his gig. We love that. Here's a question that just came in from a viewer for Dr. Wood. Dr. Wood, do you think it will take a long time to get humans to Mars?
Yes, I do. I think the trip there is a long trip, at least 6 months. And I think we don't really understand what it is going to take to have humans traveling in space that long. There's a lot of dangers from radiation and things like that, as well as just the human factor, being cooped up in a spaceship with a few other people for 6 months could, the psychological aspects, I think, need further study. So it's a really daunting challenge, but I think one that we can eventually achieve.
Homer, you've written books about sci-fi things set on the moon, and you've also written this novel, The Dinosaur Hunter, which is a great book, and it takes place there in Montana. Is one harder to write about than the other, since you are sort of intimately involved in both, or do the stories come equally easy?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're passions of mine, the dinosaur hunting as well as space and so on. So ultimately, it's about creating the characters that populate these novels that are so important. And so, I mean, just going out in the field and hunting for dinosaurs, that's a story in itself. But if you're going to write a novel about it, you've got to populate it with characters that are interesting. I might say that one of the cool things about Eastern Montana and going out and working in the Hell Creek formation are the people that live there. And so that's been one of my attractions for the last 20 years going out there. I've gotten to know the people that live in Garfield County. It's the county where the first T-Rex was ever found, and where I've done most of my field work. And they are very interesting people. They're ranchers out there. They've been socially distancing since the early 19th century.
They're good at it.
And so there's Garfield County is the size of Connecticut. And Connecticut, I believe, has about 3 million people in it, and Garfield County has about 1,000 people in it. So that can kind of about 1 million cows, though. I mean, so it's an interesting place. The people there are very interesting, and one of the challenges for scientists and paleontologists who work out there is to get to know the people, because they can be very helpful. They're out there year round, and a lot of times they know where these fossils are, and they also will let you cross their land to get to them if you're friendly. So that's kind of a unique and, for me, a very interesting aspect of working in the field in Montana, is just getting to know those great people out there. So yeah.
We're almost out of time. I want to throw it to the guys of the Museum of the Rockies, and Pat, we'll start with you. What's the next big thing to come in paleontology?
That's the cool thing about science, because we don't always know the answer to that question. But through discovery, through exploration, sending our field crews out, you never know what you're going to run into. It might actually change the questions that you have and your research design. So there's always a lot of surprises. And, I think that the work that John and the group here is doing and learning more about growth and behavior, I think that is a very important aspect of our science.
Now, John, I'm not going to give it away on the call, but you showed Homer and I something pretty special. And I said, hey, can I take a picture of that? And you said, no, the word's not out on that yet. So there are things that are coming. You can't necessarily tip your hat on, but what's the next big thing for you and your group?
Oh, I without saying too much, I don't know. As Pat said, you never know what the next big thing will be. There certainly are things that we're working on right now that we're very excited about that should hopefully be able to share in the near future that I think are pretty cool. And as Pat said, it depends at times on what you go out and you find when you're working in the field, but also, as we move forward with technology, there's more ways to analyze fossils and other data for paleontology, including going back and looking at specimens that were collected hundreds of years ago. We can now take fossils that maybe have been in a museum since the 1800s and apply different techniques, looking inside them at the microstructure, or CT scanning them or synchrotron scanning them, and learn all kinds of new things from fossils that have been around for quite some time. So there's exciting things coming for new discoveries in the field, as well as going back and looking more deeply at specimens collected many years ago.
Very cool. We just got another question for Dr. Wood. Did those pictures of Montana, does the surface of Mars resemble the Montana Badlands?
Absolutely, yes. Even the color. So it's pretty remarkable. The pictures of Mars often look like the West, especially the dry areas of the West, and it's really incredible, the similarities.
What do you think is the next big thing in your field of study? What's going to happen next that people will go, oh, wow, when they hear about it?
Well, one of the things that the Perseverance rover is going to do is cache samples for a future Mars sample return mission. And so this will be the first time that we are able to choose samples from certain locations on Mars and bring them back to Earth to study in our labs here. So we get to do what these lucky paleontologists get to do every day, get their hands on some samples. And it's amazing, the level of scientific investigation you can do with samples in hand is just so much greater than you can do with the robot. So that's the next big thing.
Pretty exciting stuff. You guys are rock stars in your fields. Thank you so much for joining us. Pat and John of the Museum of the Rockies, stay warm out there. I understand it's like 18, 19 degrees out there today.
We've gotten over a foot of snow already, so it's going to be a long winter.
Homer, you and I escaped Montana just in time. Dr. Stephen Wood in Seattle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been our virtual Rocket Boys Festival from Rocket Boy to Dinosaur Hunter episode. Homer, what a fascinating life. Gentlemen, thank you all so much. Up next at 1 o'clock Eastern, we're going to get into the engineering and science of NASA. And remember, the Mine 9 screening tomorrow. We're going to talk to the cast and producer and director. And if you're watching and you'd like to enter the Rocket Boys essay contest, you can get all the details at the Rocket Boys Facebook page. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Bye.